4 vintages now. So we started in 2000. Is everybody here? Can everybody hear me? Can you guys just nod? A lot of you are muted and being very, people have gotten so good at Zoom. It's actually amazing how adept people are at Zoom compared to 2 months ago when we started and I was muted and didn't have a speaker and like acting like a fool. So I feel much more comfortable now. But yeah, thank you all for being here. It really is like such a pleasure. This is something that I love to do, speaking about wine with people who care. And it's something that I'm used to doing. It's kind of a regular thing for me. You know, usually I'd be talking about wine and Bob Gix wouldn't be in the Bahamas. But
I'm pretty sure Bob Gix isn't in the Bahamas right now, but he's looking good.
I was gonna say, I think he's in Kashmir.
But it really is. It's like a total joy that you guys would spend your Saturday with me, hearing about the craft that I love. So yeah, I believe you have the Father's Watch. James, are they on the 16 or the 17?
Great question. The balls are upstairs. Pierce, you have the ball in front of you?
No. It should be the 17.
I have a large contingent here with me.
Yeah.
I'm not listening to me upstairs.
So I'll talk a little bit about Kivelstadt and then I'll really dive deep on the 17. And for those of you who don't want to get as dorky, I'm kind of a dork. So like if you don't want to dork out that hard, you can just shut it down and I won't be offended at all. So Kivelstadt Cellars, our focus is kind of bringing wines with soul and love that are also utilitarian. I think about this a lot with craft. I'm actually a potter as well. I do a bunch of pottery for our restaurant that we just opened, you know, so I'm like in a bunch of other restaurants and I find great joy in the relationship of kind of what I consider, this is really weird and I think about it a ton. So like the way I talk about it might sound weird, but I think a lot about what I consider utilitarian craft, kind of like craft that can touch people in their day-to-day. I think there's real beauty in crafting things that are made with love and soul that aren't luxuries, right? And I understand that 20, 25, maybe $30 is a lot for a wine, but it's not so much that it has to be a trophy, right? I want to be a part of people's day-to-day life. I think there's real beauty in that. It's something that so I went to Davis and spent a lot of time studying and working with these big, expensive wines, kind of wines that can't be consumed on your average Wednesday. And I found that I was pricing many of my friends and people I cared about and wanted to know their opinion, I was pricing them out of actually experiencing the craft that I poured so much into. And I really didn't like that. Like, I don't like the idea that only rich people can consume this beautiful thing. And for that reason, like, I take a lot of joy in, and it's the same thing in making a bowl for somebody, right? Like, I don't need to make a huge statue from ceramics for somebody to derive joy from it. I think, like, you know, James Brown wasn't just making beautiful music for a couple people, right? He was making it for everybody. So, and I've been listening to a lot of James Brown during COVID. So this is why my wife just bought me. Anyways, but I've been thinking about that a lot, that relationship with people, and a relationship where people understand that love and beauty can go into something that doesn't have to be $200 and have to be a trophy that you hold on to and hold on to. I'm much more interested in being a part of your life in a way that kind of makes you happy, makes you enjoy the company around you. That's the beauty in wine to me, is the way that it enhances your relationship to people, not so much my like hubris. This is pretty philosophical. I'm sorry. This is just how I am. But anyways, so yeah, Kivelstadt's been around for about 10 years. We focus on organically farmed vineyards. All of the Father's Watch is not only organic, but in this magnificent way, which I'll get into later when we actually talk about the wine a little further, but also dry farmed an old vine. Dry farmed, for those of you who don't know, means it's never been irrigated in its entire life, which is something that I think is really magnificent about what the grapevine can do. It's something that's really special about working with perennials. You know, I have this huge garden in my front yard because I live in a place where you can grow tomatoes just by kind of like spitting on the ground, and then the tomatoes just like grow up, you know? So like everybody in Napa and Sonoma we all think we have this magnificent green thumb, but really it's just because we're in an ecosystem in a climate that'll really just make it happen for you. But so we're keeping my hubris in check. But once again, like, I think a perennial, something that lives year after year, the beauty of the grapevine is that it really actually thrives in struggling conditions. And so finding, particularly with what's happening with water in California, finding these vineyards that have never been irrigated and have learned to survive that way, I find really powerful. And in the Father's Watch, which you have in front of you, you will have Grenache that was planted in the late 80s, early 90s, Syrah that was planted in the early 90s, and Carignan that was planted in 1950s. So it's these old vines. For California, that's very, very old. And it's something that I think there should be a celebration of age. I think that people, things, products, like, they get more soulful as they kind of have seen all these different times and changing opinions and so it's something that I really want to celebrate and keep alive. The economics of California are such that because younger vines, and for those of you who don't know, younger grapevines are much more productive. And so economically, it makes a lot more sense to tear out a 20-year-old vine and replant so that you can have a bunch of fruit and sell it, right? Is that, you guys, I can't hear any of you, but you could nod if that makes sense, or like double middle finger if you don't like me. But that's not the relationship I want to have with the planet. I think a lot about that when creating any craft is a relationship of synergy instead of a relationship of domination. And so for me, it's all about keeping these guys going, keeping them alive. And the way to do that is what you're all doing right now, right? You're supporting 70-year-old vines that would usually have been ripped out 50 years ago being alive. And it's really, for me, it's really powerful to keep these things going. It's a beauty of what we do at Kivelstadt and what you get to do as consumers. Any questions? Hand raised. Too mansplainy? Not mansplainy enough?
I think we're going well. They'll start typing them in when they have them. I have a feeling.
Oh, they can type them in. All right, cool.
I can unmute them.
So yeah, Kivelstadt, I'm really lucky that I have. It was really interesting when I came on board because I'm obviously most people in California want to make very big, rich, robust wines, kind of more alcohol driven, and what I consider more kind of human wines. Like most of the wines that are more rich and robust and those wines are more about, in my opinion, and I'm not here to judge anybody's craft, and I think any way you make it, whether you're whether you're Picasso or Rubens, like, you can make beautiful art. And I think that wine, one of the beauties of wine is that it can stretch all these different styles, and it's something that I think is really cool. But like for me, the relationship I want to have is one that is letting the vineyards speak for themselves. And what I mean by that, that's a pretty like kind of out there, it's hard to define, but what I mean by that is that modern chemistry has become a very prevalent part of the wine industry in a way that I don't think is bad at all. But what I do think is bad is that we don't legally have to create an ingredients label. And so for that reason, like a lot of these wines have all kinds of additives and things that people just don't know about. Which in a day that consumers really care about what they put in their body, it kind of sucks to have all this stuff that you don't know about. And so the wine that you have in front of you is literally just grapes and sulfur. There are no additives of any kind other than that. And I'm not here to tell you that's better or worse than another wine that maybe has other stuff added. I'm just here to say that that's a relationship that I think is cool to have with nature.
I'll do it for you. It is better to not have more.
I was gonna say, so what he basically was saying is it's just different in a way that is better.
For me, it's the relationship I want to have. I want to have a relationship where I feel like I'm working with a place and letting it express itself, as opposed to a relationship where I'm just dominating it and being like, you taste how I want. And I climbed the ladder at a lot of big Napa cab houses that were making these $200 wines that were super expensive, but the wines were chemical engineering projects. And it was something that, and the reason I'm talking about it is not to once again throw shade. I think that anybody who does any craft anyway, like, has love in it. I don't think that I produce this with more love than anybody else. I think that I have a different relationship with it, but I also think that people need to be honest. And
I think there's two divergent paths there though, where you're very accurate in a lot of those Napa houses that are producing a cab are that way, right? But then you have some really, really big companies that are intentionally engineering it to taste a way that they've found more people are going to like, and it really isn't about the craft. It's about selling as many bottles as they can.
And
right.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with being rich. I'm never gonna get rich, so like I'm kind of jealous of those people. But like for me, for me, it's like homogeny is boring. Like the beauty of my friends and the people I love is that some of them got straight A's, but some of them really screwed up in school, but then ended up like being brilliant in other ways, right? And I don't think that homogeny is interesting, right? Like if you can chemically engineer something to be exactly the way you want, then that's just a science project, and it's Coca-Cola, and there's nothing wrong with that. It can take skill, it can take intuition, but it doesn't have the same reverence for nature that is very important to me.
Yeah.
Any questions? This is really, you guys didn't know you were coming to like a philosophical treatise on my.
No, I think it's important, right? Like this is
just how I think about stuff. I'm sorry. I would love questions. It would make me speak like I'm not talking at you.
Well, I mean, like I said, this is an important part of wine that a lot of people are never really exposed to, and that there are these different ways of doing the same thing, and that's kind of cool, right? It helps the industry have more depth to the consumer. Mm-hmm. So I guess talk about a little bit how, I guess, you went to Davis and then you ended up, how do you end up at Kivelstadt?
Okay, so I went to UC, so I studied, my first round of college, I got, I'm Jewish. Sorry for any of you who don't like the Jews.
I don't think we have too many, if any.
So I'm Jewish, and I got this Jewish scholarship actually to UNR, to the University of Nevada, Reno, for mining. And I went to UNR because I was an obsessive rock climber, and I'm a pretty obsessive person in general, right? And so I really kind of it's the same way with ceramics. It was the same way with rock climbing. And now actually during COVID, I've been painting a lot, and like, obviously with wine, the same thing. I think you probably have picked that up as I talk to you. Like I think about stuff in a very strange way and in a kind of obsessive, like, I think there are multiple layers to everything. Anyway, so I went to UNR. I majored in rock climbing and geology. And then I started having all these shoulder surgeries because I tore up my arm rock climbing. And I'd always been around wine. My first jobs were farming vineyards. And I always thought that I would be some kind of a farmer, work with the earth. I thought geology would be magnificent for that. And then I realized that I was going to find gas for Exxon. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all use gas, but it wasn't the thing that I wanted to do professionally. I wanted to have a more cyclical relationship with nature that was kind of seasonal. And I kind of fell in love with farming vineyards and started farming a bunch of vineyards. And the reason I came to Kivelstadt, so I worked at Cellars. I worked all over the world, Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere, Burgundy, Beaujolais, the Rhone, Italy, little bit of time traveling around Germany. I was really lucky. I got, once again, another scholarship to pay my way to kind of dirt bag it around Europe and just talk to people about wine. And one of the beauties of wine is there's this kind of mentorship that you don't find in a lot of other craft. Like with ceramics, right? Because I'm a potter, like you meet these people and they're amazing ceramicists, but they don't want to tell you everything because anybody can create beautiful ceramics from everywhere, anywhere, if they have the skills and the knowledge. But with wine, people will give you everything because I don't have their terroir. Right? I can never make a Burgundy in Glen Ellen, where our estate vineyard is, because I'm not in Burgundy. Right? I can use their techniques. I can pay homage to people I respect and love. But I'm never going to be able to make your wine. So it's one of the most sharing artistic communities I've ever been a part of. It's really cool in that respect, And artists will give you pointers, but if you start to get good, they're kind of like, you can figure it out for yourself, right? Because they're making a living too, and I totally respect that. And so with wine, traveling around the world, I kind of took from here, took from there, and then I lived in San Francisco for 4 or 5 years and was the assistant winemaker at this small spot called Cellars. Chris is awesome, and he taught me so much about California vineyards, California wines, but really I was working in the vineyards, and the beauty of what I get to do at Kivelstadt is I spend so much time in the vineyards. It's something that I never got to do in Napa when I made Cabernet in Napa. I worked for a big company who makes fantastic Cabernet that I think a lot of you have probably heard of and seen on the shelves of grocery stores and stuff. And they were great. They just really had a different relationship with what making wine is about. I spent most of my time in a lab running numbers, and I felt like a lab technician. And my joy in wine is about having a connection to a vineyard and spending time with that vineyard and helping it grow and developing a healthy ecosystem. And I didn't get to do that. And now I'm spending tons of times in my vineyards, helping them with cover crop and compost and, but making sure they don't spray herbicides or pesticides. All these things are important to me. And I think that the most wine is magnificent and beautiful and encapsulates a vintage, but the most long lasting relationship that I'll probably have with this earth is that like I get fruit from 40 to 100 acres of vineyard once a year, and I can really help define what a healthy ecosystem is there. And that's really important to me, is creating a synergistic ecosystem that you don't have to come in and kill a bunch of insects so other ones can live. I think that killing insects in a vineyard is like getting chemo for the flu. Like the body's designed, the vineyard's designed to balance itself out. And so if you let it figure it out, you'll find a very healthy ecosystem. And that's the most important thing, right? Because I won't be here for the next 1,000 years, but the world will. So yeah, so thank you. Somebody laughed at one of my shitty jokes. I love it.
I'm gonna just.
I'm
we're
a
gonna hit
positive thinker. I beg to differ.
Well, we can influence it, but we can't be, you know, I want to influence it in the right way. I think about this incessantly.
I'm gonna. We had a couple questions come through that I kind of delayed here. One, people want to know the location of the vineyard. I think you have a number of them, and then after you go with that one, we'll hit a couple more.
Yeah, so the Father's Watch is up in Calpella. It's north of Healdsburg. So what I find, you know, I champion these varietals that are off the beaten path. You know, you guys all know Cabernet and Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot and Merlot. But I champion varietals like Carignan, Grenache, and Syrah, these varietals that people don't hear about as much, but are just as great in California as anywhere else. They're just not as economically viable. And so I tend to go further and further north to find these beautiful old vine plantings because people tear them out young down south to replant Cabernet. So yeah, this is in Calpella, which is really far north. It's super arid, which is something that's actually awesome. It doesn't have the fungal issues that I'm used to in vineyards. And like I said, like I'm a total dork, and this is just the way I always think about wine. I can't quite help it. But because it's so arid, it makes it so I don't have to really do any intense kind of coming into these vineyards. You know, you spray sulfur twice a year and that's it, which is, it's hard to explain how minimalist that is compared to what I'm used to. It's really, really, really low intervention. And I think that that's kind of beautiful, right? I think that when you have to spray and dominate an ecosystem, it's more of a sign that you're doing something in the wrong ecosystem than anything else. But it happens very rarely in kind of a lot of regions throughout California. So yeah, up north, it's this kind of Cohasset loam. So it's alluvial soils. They're soils that are from ancient riverbeds, so pretty sedimentary, but also deep with clay. And so it means that the roots with these dry farm vineyards can just dig deeper and deeper and deeper. And even in the drought years, find great. They're always kind of mining for water, which is something I love.
So that covers the Father's Watch. He has a number of other wines that I also think are really great. I am doing a tasting up in Snohomish with them next week, the Charbonneau and the Sauv Blanc. And you work with a number of other labels like the KC Labs and stuff like that. So are those all in similar areas, or are you spread out?
So I drive a hybrid because it's one of the beauties and curses of being a winemaker and your own in California. You know, I think that in France, somebody makes Cabernet Franc and it's in front of their house every day. And they'll only ever make Cabernet Franc, which I think there's a beauty in that, but it's also a curse. Whereas I get to do this thing that I think is really important in craft, in experimenting with a bunch of different things and keeping sharp with different techniques. And so I work as far south as Napa Sonoma, as far north as Calpella, Ukiah. And so I do spend a lot of time kind of driving from vineyard to vineyard, and checking out what's happening with my farming, talking to my grower, you know, being up and down. But it gives me the ability. I make 15 wines, which is pretty insane. I'm pretty insane. And I like to make a lot of different wines and kind of have these different experiments and play with different stuff. And so it's a beauty of being a winemaker in California, that you can pay homage to all these different people from all over the world that you love. And I can use their techniques I was taught, that somebody was taught by their grandfather's grandfather, use them in California, and we'll have completely different products, but similarly produced. And that's kind of, it's something I get asked a lot, like, what's your favorite? And I say, you know, I don't have a favorite. It's just what speaks to you, what place, what grape, you know, I'm pretty hands off. And so it's more about like what wine you connect with, and that is more about the place than me. And that's something that I think is really cool and special about wine that we don't get in a lot of other products.
So another question here was, how do you go about letting the grapes speak for themselves, and does that kind of differ
Oh, that's a
from
good question.
grape to grape?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are a few things I do. In the vineyard, I do a lot of really minimal farming techniques. So a lot of people do, and this is going to be pretty dorked out, a lot of people do a lot of canopy manipulation, right? A grapevine is a bush. It's going to have shoots. Does anybody here grow tomatoes? Raise your hand. That was just a test to see if anybody was paying attention. All right, you guys all passed. We're good. So yeah. So like a tomato vine, right? It grows up, and there's a lot of canopy manipulation stuff that people do to grapes in order to get them more ripe, right? Get them more sugar. A lot of winemaking nowadays is a race to get as much sugar and richness as possible. And I do almost exactly the opposite of that. So I want my growers and in my vineyards, like I'll always leave a lot of fruit on the vine. I want them to have slow and steady ripening. So I think about a source sink relationship. Source would be like anything that can photosynthesize. Sink would be reproductive growth, grapes in this case. So like the grapes are going to suck a lot of carbohydrates. If there's more grapes on the vine, then they will actually gain sugar more slowly while developing a lot of richness and ripeness. And that wouldn't seem like it was important, I think, for a lot of people. But what happens to most grapes nowadays is people pick them and then they add water and then they add acid and they kind of create this thing. But I don't do any of that, right? Because I'm not adding water or acid. It's really important for me to slow down the phenolic ripeness, the ripeness of the skins, the flavoring compounds that you're going to get without I want that ripeness without sugar ripeness and acid dropping out. Because I'm not going to add acid to your wine. I want it all to be natural. The flavor is very different. And it's also just this, once again, a different relationship. Like, I don't want to be dominating these grapes and turning them into a chemical engineering project. I just want them to be the way that people think about wine. When people think about wine, in my experience, it's just grapes that are crushed that turn into fantastic alcoholic juice. And it's really, I mean, James and Pierce can both speak to, like, it's really not the case very often anymore.
No.
Right. And it's the relationship we all want to have. Like when we go to a great restaurant, we want to know that those tomatoes are just tomatoes that came locally. And we all know that those tomatoes have better flavor. Right. And it's the same with grapes. When you don't do all this manipulation, you'll get so much more purity. And that's just, I think it's a special relationship for me. And I think the product for my tastes are better. I'm so political right now.
How disappointed do you feel when you go and you get a tomato after you've had one out of your garden? It's like,
yeah, it's a totally different experience, and you just can't go back to getting tomatoes on your burger when they're shipped from a hothouse and wherever.
Yeah. This was another question here. What are the most common additives that you try and stay away from that others might be prone to using?
Okay, so people use a lot of water in wine. And we call it, where I used to work, there used to be, so we would get work orders that would have all the additives on it. And it would be like yeast, which people kind of expect. I don't add yeast to any of the wines that you guys are going to taste. I want the yeast from the vineyard to come in and kind of, I think that's that's a relationship I want to have. I want to let them kick off. But so it would be yeast and then acid, nutrients. And then there would always be this thing called JU. So the Jesus unit is completely common vernacular in the wine industry, and a JU is turning water into wine. So it's a JU 400 gallons. That means put 400 gallons into the tank of water so you can bring the sugar down so that the potential alcohol will be at this level. And so like Napa, anyways, so yeah, JU is huge. Then there's a lot of stuff for stability. Velcorin, all this stuff that people use in Coca-Cola and Gatorade, and once again, these carcinogens that people use to stabilize their wines.
Yeah.
Right?
Or,
Like,
or draw color or help filter, so on and so forth.
yeah, so there are 200 legal additives to wine. Many wineries use a bunch of them, but because the FDA doesn't require an ingredients level, I get put in a position I don't like. Like, I don't want to be here like narking people out. It doesn't feel good. Like, I think that and I think that those guys, the people who make it in that way would probably be happy to be honest about it. But when they're not honest about it, it makes me the guy like standing up baby, you want to come in and say hi to everybody? No, thank you. My wife just walked in, so.
She had the same reaction my wife would. Be like, no.
Yeah, she was like, no, I'm good.
You go ahead and nerd out. It'll be
Yeah,
all good.
exactly. She's heard this speech enough. And yeah, so I just think it's something that it doesn't happen. It puts me in a position where most consumers think, because it's hard not to think, that wine is just grapes, but in a lot of cases it's not. Once again, like, I'm not here to tell you that that's bad or that's good. They're just different relationships, and I think the relationship that I have, for me, feels better.
I think I myself, like you, tend to think a lot more than maybe is healthy sometimes. But I kind of had a long process with myself earlier this year where I was thinking about how much I want to know what I'm eating or putting into my body, and I think that we came to the conclusion, just probably starting this next year, that we're going to label our ingredients in our wine.
Yeah,
it's because for me, it's the right thing to do. That doesn't mean I won't ever use an additive, but I want to tell people I use it and this is why I used it.
And I think that's my goal is not to be dogmatic, and I think every craftsman should make their craft however they want. And I think there's power in that. And I also think there's power in honesty, right? Like, you can do it in conjunction, and then everybody gets educated. Hey, why'd you have to use nutrients? Oh, I had a really low nutrient year, da-da-da-da. Like, that's awesome. That's totally fine. But why'd you add water? Oh, because people want to hide because a lot of people are doing that because water is free and grapes are expensive, right? So you get it super rich, da-da-da. All right, I'm soapboxing too much. Let's talk about the Father's Watch.
Yeah, it's the 17.
The 17 was a magnificent vintage, a quite strange vintage, because of the fires. It was really interesting. We had all of my wine was picked by the time the fire hit in 17. So nothing you'll taste has smoke taint. But like, the fires were it shook our industry in a really intense way. I grew up in Napa and have had, friends from all over forever, and have worked with a lot of people who maybe came over here for the American dream and don't quite have green cards, and I don't want to get political or whatever, but a lot of those people who lost their homes, like, they don't have support systems. And so that kind of stuff hit us so hard, and we really wanted to support our community, and we did with a lot of donations, all kinds of stuff. So 17 is just this year that the wines are beautiful, and we had all this richness and ripeness. It was a really great long growing season before the fires. But it's also, it was an intense year around here because we had these massive fires. The morels were fantastic for any mushroom foragers. The morels that year were insane, which I'm a big mushroom forager, so it's fantastic. But the 17 is Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre. All my reds I'll pretty much make the same way, the traditionally fermented red. So I do about a third whole cluster, pour them in, just straight up whole cluster, entire thing, exactly what you would get from a market or a supermarket or whatever. But then I destem the other 2/3, pour it over the top, and then really gentle extraction. I want this wine to have tannin and mid palate and that little bit of savoriness that you get from the stems, but also just I don't need it to be hulking. I don't want it to be huge. I want it to be able to pair with a bunch of different stuff. And I think this wine can really go from even a like fatty fish all the way up to kind of a steak fruit, right? If you're gonna have a fillet, like I would tell you to get something bigger and rounder, right? And that's just it. But I love the table wine. There aren't as many wines that are designed to do everything in California. And it's something that is totally a norm for a lot of the wine drinking world. This wine that you can buy that's, 20 to 25 bucks, but made with love and soul. Once again, I've already said this, but it's something that I'm always thinking about. This wine that can be utilitarian. You can have it on a Wednesday if you're lucky enough to be able to afford 25 bucks, which is awesome. And you're supporting me, and it's not cheap, but it's not so much that it has to be a celebration. It's just a wine that can be a part of your everyday, even though it's barrel aged for 24 months, like done completely right with as much. It's just as serious as any other wine, and it can do so much. And it's made from great vineyards, and it's just this like, it's an homage to a world of wine that I grew up with, a world of wine where everybody could drink a glass every night, and it wasn't like a sacrifice financially.
Can you tell me more about what doing the whole cluster does, so people can kind of you do that?
So a whole cluster will do a couple things. You'll get flavors from the stems that you usually wouldn't get. So stems have flavor, and it's a much more savory flavor. I think you get, I get really self-conscious tasting note at people, because I think like one of the beauties of wine tasting notes is that they're subjective. And I think what I would call something somebody else would call something else, would be talking about the same thing. But I love what I find you get in these wines are kind of dried sage and dried thyme, like these really savory herbs, but dried particularly, not as much as fresh. And then some tobacco, and all of that stuff is from the stems. But what it also does with the stems, so you get that sage, thyme, sometimes tarragon, but more fresh tarragon. But then also like high-toned red fruit, right? Cranberry, raspberry. Not that often strawberry, but if you say strawberry, you're right and I'm wrong. I would love for anybody to tell me their tasting notes. I love to hear them. I do get really self-conscious, because I think one of the beauties of it is that it's so subjective, and everybody has a different olfactory vernacular. That's probably the first time you ever heard olfactory vernacular. I think it's the first time I've said it. But,
It's very, that's a very true assessment, right?
I was gonna say that's the first time it's ever been said. So there you go. Sam Barron, that's the quote that's going on his gravestone.
But also by fermenting whole cluster, the fermentations are a lot cooler. So when you're fermenting, for those of you who don't know, the way that you can have a Pinot Blanc, like a Blanc de Noir champagne, right? So Blanc, you've got Blanc de Blanc, which is made from Chardonnay and Pinot Blanc usually, but mostly Chardonnay. And then Blanc de Noir, which is a white wine made from Pinot Noir, right? And the way you can make a white wine from Pinot Noir is because all the color is in the skins, right? And so the more you extract from the skins, the more of that skin flavor, tannin, and what's in the skins is color and tannin. Tannin's the kind of sandpapery taste that you associate with red wines that you don't get in white wines. It's kind of chalky,
Sticky.
Yeah. It's the thing that peanut butter, right? It's the thing that makes your tongue stick to your roof of your mouth, right? So that's called tannin. The anthocyanin are the coloring compounds. So I'm like this like idiot alcoholic who actually went to college, so I know all these big words. But yeah, so it's so you've got the anthocyanin, which is all the coloring compounds, that is what you see in a red wine, right? You don't get any of that from the juice. No red wine gets pressed off and has red juice, right? It's all from the skins. And so, but one of the main things that I can do to kind of help the vineyard express in a more restrained way. What's up, Bubba? Look at all these people. What's your name?
That's what in grammar.
Is it Can you say hi, Sam?
Hi, Sam. Hi.
This is my daughter, Lincoln.
Hi, Lincoln.
Our daughter.
Oh, excuse me. My wife is standing behind the computer saying, "All right."
It came out of nowhere. I love it. Hi, Lincoln. Welcome.
Yeah. You're saying hi to Uncle James and Grandma and Grandpa? Yeah.
Hi, Lincoln.
Hello. Good calling.
Sorry for the interruption, guys.
No. It's great.
Happy Father's Day. Happy Father's
Yeah, happy Father's Day. Happy Father's Day, Lincoln. We all have
Thank
that.
you.
We're all going to celebrate on Sunday.
That's right.
Where's Amir?
I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna mute us so you can get back to the wine conversation.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you extract from the skins, and this is when Lincoln's like, this is the most boring conversation ever. So when you extract from the skins, you get all this color, but also all this flavor. And so that's something that I think about a lot with the whole cluster, James, that you asked about, because it'll keep my temperatures of my fermentation cool. And the main ways to extract color from skins are alcohol, temperature, and movement. And so what I do to I think vineyards will express themselves more if you have a lighter touch with extraction. And so I use whole cluster to make my temperatures of my fermentation lower. A lot of people ferment like red wines at 90 to 100 degrees, 95. So they can really pull everything out of the skins and get their bang for their buck. And then a lot of people also want to do a lot of movement. So we do pump overs and punch downs, different ways to move the skins, right? Because of what I said, where all the color comes from the skins and these flavors come from the skins. So the two techniques you have are to spray it down like it's with a fire hose, or to punch it down like essentially with what would be like a potato masher, like a traditional potato masher that's kind of a square but big and long, and you pushing down this big cap of fermentation. It's the way I stay in I keep my girlish figure from punch downs during harvest, because I actually I've torn my butt.
Especially with stem inclusion.
Yeah,
punch downs and stem inclusion are brutal.
Yeah, it's so much work. And so, so that's a big thing, pretty much me all day during harvest, is just like standing on top of bins and tanks and pushing this big potato masher down so they have movement, so more color will be extracted. But I do this in a really light way compared to a lot of other people, so that I don't want to just be pulling everything I can. I want them to give me what they want. And so low temperature because of the kinetics of the whole cluster, and then really low wine movement. One pump over a day, one punch down a day, as minimal as I can get. I want it to steep like a tea, essentially, instead of just like beating up the skins and pounding flavor out of them, is the way that I think of it. And I think it's an apt, I've seen it the other way, where you really suck everything out of the skins by all this movement, and they're living under a fire hose, and the flavors are a lot more intense. And then the other thing that you can use for extraction is alcohol, but I make a bunch of low alcohol wines. And I love the lower alcohol in the wine for food and wine pairing. I just think it's a much more higher alcohol wines, to me, kind of dominate the flavor profile, and I want to be a part of what you're doing, if that makes sense. I want it to pair with whatever you're eating. I want it to enhance your conversation but not be a focal point, whereas like all these big massive wines are so big that you can't really eat food with them without them just dominating the flavor of the food, and I want to be doing that dance with the flavors of the food. Yeah.
So I got a couple more questions. Of these wines that you make, it's like, I guess this is asking like your favorite child type of question.
Oh no, you know what I'm gonna say.
I know, but let's be truthful. Like I know that there's got to be one that you like to drink more or like to work with more, because it's just really a fascinating thing for you.
My wife drinks like a pallet of rosé a year, so like the rosé is really important, because if I mess it up, my wife will murder me, and I love my wife and I want her to be happy.
So the rosé for your happiness.
So the rosé, but I make a really traditional rosé. I pick it to be rosé. I foot tread the Grenache. I actually personally hop in and stomp the grapes, so we'll get a little extraction. and it's like a total workout. It took me 3 hours last year, and it's like being on a stair mat. Stomping grapes isn't awesome. Like Lucy made it look way more chill than it is.
Oh my
But
goodness.
I'm willing to do it for you guys.
It's work, no doubt.
But I really don't. I don't think about wines as favorite or least favorite, right? Like, I really don't. This sounds super political, and I'm not trying to be like a politician on you, but I think that wines serve different purposes, and the reason one might speak to me one vintage and one might not is due to the relationship that I had with it. And I think that like your relationship with whatever wine speaks to you is more beautiful than me telling you like which one's my favorite. Right? They're all my children. They're screw ups, and I hate them equally.
Okay, I can live with that answer.
I actually can relate to that.
Yeah.
We know Carol can relate to that.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
She definitely can.
Um,
Problem is, we end up doing the same thing, literally opening the same winery.
I know. I remember. But they really do. It's like every year, I think some speak to me that others don't. And it just depends on what happens throughout the year, the things, the inputs, right? Like, it's part of that kind of cycle that I love.
Sure.
And I'm sure you love it. You're a winemaker. You understand what I'm talking
yeah. So a question I overlooked earlier was what's the case production for Kivelstadt?
about. Okay, so this is my biggest blend. We make like between 700 and 1,000 cases a year of this. I make 15 SKUs, so the smallest wine I make is 50 bottles. James is going to murder me because nobody who sells wine wants 50 bottles of wine. It's like the biggest pain in the butt ever.
But as a winery, I appreciate that you did it. As a sales rep, I don't appreciate that.
As a winemaker, right? So a lot of the SKUs get really, really small because I think there's beauty in like. So once again, I think about myself as a craftsman, and I think there's beauty in stretching your boundaries and in your norms. If you make the same thing all the time, I think you'll stagnate. And I think there really is like the intuition and the improvisation you get from playing with different stuff and doing different like scales is really fun, and it's something that I love, and I think it makes the product more unique. I think it makes these wines that I love like from year to year, like I'm learning, and the experience also like I think translates to these magnificent bottles because my intuition is good. And God, that was a lot of hubris. I'm like Odysseus, right?
I mean, it seems accurate to me, so that's fine. I mean, you clearly have a relationship where you do understand what you're working with, and you're not just guessing. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Does anybody have any? I'm sick of James. Does anybody want to ask me any questions with their own voices?
Yeah, I'll mute you, or you can unmute yourself.
I think he was just
James is just catching strays over
questions
here.
off the list. About the color.
Yeah.
It is a really beautiful granite color.
Oh, thank
Not
you.
granite, garnet, sorry.
Garnet. Yeah.
So what is in the color as opposed to a regular color wine?
All right, so this is a great question, and I'm going to do two answers. Okay, I'm going to do one that's really dorked out, and then one that's a little more straight up. So the color is going to be based on, in a lot of times, the ripeness and the extraction. Remember how I was talking about that really low extraction where I'm not pushing the skins super hard? So because I'm not pushing as much out of those skins, I'll get that like really beautiful color that I love. And then there's this other thing that happens scientifically where, do you know like pH, like acid to basic? This isn't a test. And knows, like a lot of people, my wife says no to this. She just tells me to shut up all the time. But so the lower something is on the pH scale, the more purple the color it will be, and then the higher something is on the pH scale, the more red brickish something will be. So you get that garnet with wines that have more acid.
Interesting.
That
And
yeah, so like and it's the way that acid and pH balance affects anthocyanins, which is this thing that like is really dorked out, but I think it's kind of cool.
yeah, it allows
But
them to
like nobody,
it makes perfect sense.
right? And so something that's really alcoholic also usually has a really high alcohol level or acid level compared to my wines. And at a pH 4.2, something will be much more like brick hued.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that makes sense, right? Because as it gets older, you get the bricking and you're getting the polymerization of the acid. So sure.
Yep, exactly. And so it's wines exactly. Was that good? Did I help you? Maybe.
Perfect. That was a hearty maybe to probably.
I hope it was more. I hope.
I kind of want to ask, his dad has a long time in the wine game also, and I know you guys have started making wine together, or at least selling wine together more recently.
Mhm.
I kind of want to, you've learned from a lot of different people. How has it been kind of working with him? He has worked for some houses that obviously have different philosophies than you, and so how's that come together for you guys?
So Father's Day is coming up. So actually working with my dad has been one of the most special experiences I've ever had. My dad is a singular person, and he's also insane. Like he created me. So like but he is a true, like, he's so focused in this insane way, and I love it. And like, he's one of my best friends, but working with him 5 years ago, we would have murdered each other. But now we just have this great relationship, and it's been so, I mean, he's been a mentor for me in so many ways. He grew up he's seen a lot of things, and he's mentored me not only as a winemaker, but just as a person. And it's special to have that relationship and get to spend time with your father and learn from him. And, it wasn't like when I was a kid, I wanted to be a winemaker, and it wasn't for him. It was not about that. It was about this relationship and this cyclical relationship with nature, and kind of celebrating it, and having the ups and downs that you do have when you live with the cycles. It's like in winter it's pretty mellow, we're out pruning, but it's not a rush. And that was always, I hated harvest growing up, because I was like, where is dad? He's supposed to be playing t-ball with me. But like, it's this beauty to learn from somebody who really has invested 6 years of his life into winemaking, and it's inspired me a lot in my relationship with kind of not focusing on scores and stuff like that I think have driven a lot of the wine industry, but instead focusing on the relationship I want to have. And the relationship I want to have has always been driven by the relationship that he has, about having a relationship with a vineyard where it could speak for itself, and you're kind of influencing the environment in a way that'll last beyond you. And that's been really cool. And I still want to punch him in the face like every Tuesday. So it's a nice balance. I wish I had been recording this so I could send it to him. He'd be like, yeah, I know.
Good news, I recorded it for you. We'll ship it right over.
All right, perfect. I want to see it. That's awesome. But the wines that we make are like, it's been so fun. It's been so cool. And it's a sociological experiment that seems to be working for all of us.
That's cool. I haven't had a chance to try them yet. You gotta.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you gotta call Brian and Jack and tell them to get them out here on the West Coast, a lot closer to New York.
Exactly.
Yeah, either that or just come up and bring them.
Yeah, or that.
I'm
No,
okay with that.
I'd
too.
love to come see you. Pierce, we had so much fun with that. Any other questions? You can ask me anything. I'm Pisces.
I would love to know the technique that you have loved incorporating in your winemaking from your travels around the world.
Oh, that's a really good question. So this question can kind of spiral actually, because there are kind of, and I think James and Pierce, both producers, would agree with me that there's kind of these different realms of winemaking, and it's like the Republican and the Democratic Party. Like there are these two realms, but really there's a lot of like individualism in between, right? And so there's what we consider like modern winemaking and traditional, right? Would you guys agree with that? There's this modern and traditional, and contemporary winemaking tends to be more of a focus on what I talk about, like human terroir, like wines that are kind of destined by the producer, and they're making all these different changes to make the flavors change. And then the traditionalists tend to be more kind of focused on farming, and then also this like hands-off approach where the vintage will speak for itself and it doesn't have to be perfect every year. And so like I've had the education of somebody who would do the modernist, but then I kind of have the philosophy who's somebody who does the traditional. And you can incorporate, I think about this like, I'm not a huge Picasso guy, but like, you know, Picasso like could paint beautiful like Spanish imperialist paintings when he was 17, but then he like ended up making all this like offshoot stuff, like kind of knocking off good artists that he was friends with. That's a hot take. Anybody?
I'm gonna leave it down. You guys marinate on that one.
But like so like I think about like you have to learn the rules to break them. And by learning the rules of modernism, I could break them with more confidence and safely, because like though it is this beautiful thing that I get to do, I have to not mess up. Because if I mess up, my boss is going to be like, you just made a bunch of vinegar, and vinegar is not wine. And so like you have to walk, right? So like it's walking this line, and because I understand the rules, now I can break them and kind of focus on that more traditional side. Did I answer your question?
Yes, I love that answer. That was fabulous.
I'm so proud of answering questions.
Drinking vinegar is really popular now, so.
Yeah.
It is, but it sells for a lot less. So
Yeah.
That was a great question.
Everybody's making bread now. The amount of bread, the sourdough starter, like growing, because I'm like, I'm a ceramicist. I'm not lying about that. But the amount of my friends who are like, I'm making sourdough now. I will take a sourdough starter thing with a lid. I've made like 10 of them. Everybody's in sourdough, COVID-19.
We made bread today, actually. So we've been all about the bread making.
You made sourdough today.
We made it today, yes.
And it's fantastic, right? Homemade sourdough is so good.
So good.
But what about a global pandemic made everybody make sourdough? I can't put it together, but it's awesome. I support sourdough wholeheartedly. I'm pro gluten.
100%. Thank you for answering our question. You're
My
wonderful.
pleasure. I hope it wasn't too long-winded and weird.
I want to push them a little bit more though. Like where you went to all these places, you have to have. I mean, you must have some place that kind of feels like, you know, there's a wine. I'll put it this way: there's wine drinkers who have a wine that got them into. Or is there a place that got you like, I love this. This is kind of where I want to be. You know,
Dovisat, Chablis, Dovisat.
Chablis. Okay.
But Dovisat particularly.
So okay. I mean, that's very specific because Chablis is not huge. So.
Well, so I was with, and this is super esoteric. See, this isn't good. This is not a good podcast right now, James.
That's true. I disagree with you.
This is the part where James gets selfish and he's like, no, I want to know because I want to.
Well, it's because
Dovisat is this producer who I met in Chablis who had these the craziest teeth, and it's like 4th generation dude. And he fermented everything in 30-gallon barrels, but he had, it's like, you know, you speak to people who are just kind of like these pure creative minds. Like, he just really loved to talk about these weird intricacies in the way he made his wine and the place that he farmed and the way he had to farm it. And it was just kind of this beautiful thing that had grown. And, you know, mostly it was just like, keep your hands off it. And anyways, Delvisat Chablis. And then he also, the wines are really expensive in California, and he sold us like all this stuff for nothing. And it was just magnificent. We drank Chablis forever.
Wine tasting in Europe is a lot different than it is in the States. It's something that if you love wine and you can do someday, do it. You make your appointment. You know, call them up and say, hey, I want to come on, or
So
you know, it won't be the same experience that you have when you go wine tasting here. It's a lot beautiful way.
Les Perus, 32 euros.
Yeah, right.
It was
I
insane.
mean, I went through Alsace and bought a bunch of the wine that cost a small fortune here for nothing.
Yeah, cool story. Nobody's impressed because this is really boring talking.
I know, that's true. The problem with this podcast here is that I could talk to Sam about wine for the better part of the next month and still be very happy.
Well, the good news, guys, is this is probably destined to get 9 views on YouTube.
Yeah. Well, everybody, I'm happy to answer any questions anybody else has. This has been, I think, actually more fun for me than anybody else here. But I hope we had it. Really does like fill my heart with joy to see faces enjoying wine, and I hope that I enhanced your spirit and your conversation and your evening, because that's the beauty of what I do. And I think about it a lot, but the most important thing is you by far. And to see you all, and even people kind of tuning in right now to hear my spiel, which is nice. But yeah, I really honestly like, it's special to see you all right now in this time, and it's a time that you don't get the connection we usually do. So thanks so much for drinking the wines. I'm happy to hang out as long as anybody wants. Ask any questions you want. But yeah, this has been awesome, and I'm lucky to have you all drinking wine that I touched. It's really cool for me.
You did a good job. I like it.
It's delicious. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm from Truckee, by the way.
Oh, you're in Truckee?
Well, no, I'm from there. I'm in Seattle, but
you're in Seattle? Well,
I work for James and Pierce's dad.
Really?
Yeah.
All right, on a scale of mean to terrible, how is he?
Oh,
my dad? Oh, man. He's sitting right there in back of Carol, so this is a great question. How mean is your boss?
Mm-hmm.
He's as mean as he looks. He's as mean as he looks.
So,
yeah, that sounds about right.
Awesome, but you're from Truckee.
Chilling on the couch.
The best. And so most people here are from Seattle, right?
Yeah, and some Eastern Washington mixed in. I think there's some Montana mixed in tonight. Yeah, kind of that general area.
And so it's actually something like, usually I touch people and they're like right in front of me. It's so cool to see what the internet does.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. I agree. It's kind of blowing my mind, really.
All right.
I have
a question.
A question about your 15 wines. Where do you make them?
Okay, so I make all the wines at the same place.
I'm a wine newbie. Where do you make them?
So my buddy owns a winery in Sonoma, and so he lets me come in there. I met him years back. So this is one of those weird, like, you meet somebody through school and then you call them and you're like, hey, I want to make wine, but I have no money. So I'd love to like come make wine where you make wine and pay you less money. And you have friends and they're pretty cool with it. So it was really nice. He kind of styled me out, and we're up in Sonoma. So it's a pure like production facility. We don't host anybody there. I mean, like, if you came out to see me, Zena or Zena?
Zena.
Zena? So if you came out to see me, like, I'd show you around, but it's not like we have a tasting room. If you want to come out, hit up James. I will take care of you 100%. But, like, it's not like this thing that's open to the public all the time, which I think really changes the way you can have a relationship with what you're doing. Because I never have to put on a show or fake it. I just get to do what I think is right. And I think sometimes you end up like, if you're making wine and you're entertaining people, you know, there's an inherent human thing that kind of encapsulates that and comes in. I think a lot of us kind of want to entertain and get caught up in that. I'm way too philosophical for a chill hang.
No, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, you should, Sam, you should come hang out with James and I when we're working at the winery. It's like philosophy 101, just like all over the place.
All the time. Yeah, it's bad.
But you guys, are you guys harvesting in September or late?
About beginning of November.
Oh, see, so I could definitely come up. That's the beauty, because I'm done. Like, we're done early down south.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think our last pick will probably be, it's almost always one of our more vineyards, and it's usually like right at Halloween.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So for people who don't know, James, explain, like, so I pick from August 15th to mid-November, maybe.
Yeah.
Right? And then explain the difference because of the microclimates and what's happening with global warming. Like, I'm picking earlier and earlier, and these guys just keep pushing it further and further back. Yeah. But then still, because you're growing Mourvedre and
well, I mean, part of it is that we've in Eastern Washington we've intentionally searched out vineyards with long hang times, right? Like, we're not trying to go to the hottest spot because I'm not trying to torch the grapes. So
totally.
If somebody says they have their Mourvedre ready to go and it's like, you know, October 1, I'm like, that's probably not going to work for us. That's going to be.
That's amazing.
It's great that the alcohol potential is like 16, but I'd rather have it at 12. So
see, that's amazing. Like, if I hung my Mourvedre till October, the potential alcohol would be 40. It would be like a rum.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no. So yeah, it's really different. I mean, right? I mean, we get these crazy long days this time of year, right? I mean, it's, you know, it's
how do you think a crazy long day like that will affect you differently than it would affect me down south?
Well, so for us right now, it just allows us to photosynthesize a little bit longer. And if we didn't have that, we just wouldn't have long enough days, because by the time October comes around, we're looking at, you know, it's dark, you know, it's light at maybe 7 and it's dark by about 5. And so our days just get condensed. And so without these long days now, we wouldn't get to ripeness at all.
Are you guys pushing shoots and clusters now? When do you start pushing shoots, and how much like more hang time do you think you have, and what does that mean to you? Explain on my podcast.
Okay. And so for us, I mean, again, it depends on the vineyard a little bit, right? Because we're spread out, right? I mean, it's just like you were.
No. Stick to the question.
Okay, I'll stick to the question. So for us, the shoots are getting to the point where we basically are going through flowering right now, right? And
so this is that was kind of the point I was making, is that I'm through flowering in every vineyard I have.
Right.
So like, how much more? And will you explain to everybody what through flowering means?
Yeah. So, you know, you just like essentially any plant you have this growth cycle where you get the bud, and then you get the shoot, and then the plant says, oh, I'm getting enough energy, I'm going to reproduce now. So they start to, you know, produce their flowers, and grapes self-pollinate. So that makes that a little bit easier. But they go through this period of flowering where that determines our fruit set, and then we move on from there.
So flowering, and fun fact about grapes. So when bees all die, which hopefully isn't going to happen, but
I definitely didn't help that today. But that was wasps.
Well,
But grapevines are one of the only self-pollinating fruits, and they are the self-pollinating fruit that creates the most sugar. Wine grapes particularly create the most sugar of any fruit that's naturally occurring. So in the event that all the bees die, grapes will be the source of all sugar. That's a like fun fact.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, right? So yeah, I mean, so you're probably 2 or 3 weeks ahead of us.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I think it's vineyard specific too, because I mean, we have some vineyards that are like full on fruit set at this point.
We're 13 weeks out from our hottest vineyard, probably right in that ballpark, and you're probably a little bit sooner than that.
Yeah.
So when you guys are walking vineyards this time of year, what are you looking for?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I can't say that we're doing sprawl or head training in some of our vineyards like you are. And that's just a little bit.
It's all VSP?
Not all. We have a couple of vineyards.
Wait, what's VSP?
Vertical shoot positioning. So you've taken instead of just letting the vine spread itself however it wants to, we're forcing the shoots into a vertical position to be more like a solar panel.
But wait, so like how does that work? Because how do you force them up?
We use a wire and basically hook them up, or you could hand tie all of them if you felt so inclined.
But what? But you hook them with a wire? I mean, the way I see a wire, it kind of comes down from the top.
Well, so you have
I want a podcast. Somebody give me.
You have these long.
Sam, I will straight up start a podcast with you. We can start a weekly podcast.
Because VSP is like because we can say VSP so confidently, but it's actually kind of an abstract thing for a lot of people, and I think like sharing it with them.
Yeah,
because it does affect the right? So like why would you want to be vertically shoot positioned versus like a big candelabra versus something else that you would see out there?
So two reasons essentially, and I'm not sure that they're the best reasons, but it's the way that I have to work with them because I don't have control of my vineyard yet. One, like I said, you're creating a solar panel where they're essentially, in theory, taking maximum light. But what I'm also doing is I'm also opening up some of the grape clusters to
Maggie, that was an awesome dance that you just did. Sorry.
Yeah, she says do you have a Mickey Mouse hat behind you? Like that's what she's trying to get me to ask you.
Yeah. So you're creating a solar panel for carbohydrates.
Right. And then not only that, you're opening up all these grapes that would have been covered by the shoots to the sun. And so in theory that helps phenolic ripening, but also can lead to a lot of sunburn. So it's kind of a balancing act there that I fight a little bit more than I'd like. And
what would be other like ways to support the shoots and stuff? Like why if you're not going straight up, what else could you do? Like so you're saying it's just like there's like this shoot that grows up like a tree and then it goes straight up.
Yeah, I mean essentially, yeah.
But is it multiple cordon? Like do they like
depends on the vineyard. But yeah, but most of the time there's a trunk and then there's two arms that go like that, and then the shoots come out of those arms. And,
I'm so impressed that people are still here.
I know they must really like me more than they should right now, especially. But you know,
I love to talk about this. I hope this is like it's gonna be like. Sam and this is going to be some weird YouTube video where they're like, these two people are idiots. Check this out.
That's right.
And then we'll go viral.
You would both admit to that being true.
Yeah, so there's like, the shoot comes up and then there's these cordons and then the fruit comes off and you go straight up to create like a photosynthetic net.
Yep. And, we got people saying that they'd listen to our podcast. See, that's your first mistake. You think this might be the best?
My self-loathing.
It might get way worse than this.
I'm just.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different.
So self-conscious, I can't not say it out loud.
Yeah. I mean, the extreme opposite is basket, right? Maybe you should start training yours in basket. You go Santorini.
Santorini would be cool. So
Yeah.
the reason that I don't like the vertical shoot positioning that you're talking about, is that, and I'm not like, I think that it probably could be much more successful where you are than where I am, too.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's much hotter in California.
Yeah.
Right? And so for you, going vertical shoot positioning, the point of vertical shoot positioning in my mind, the way I think about it, is it's like you have this trellising system that'll catch all the shoots that come out of this plant, right? And what they'll also do is expose all the grapes, right?
Yep.
And so the grapes are getting more sun, and you're also dropping a lot of vegetative growth that's like what would be a source, but then can become a sink if it just overgrows, and focusing everything into the grapes. And if I farm that way here, I would have overripe fruit. I'd have way more sugar and less acid than flavor when I wanted to pick.
Yeah. I mean, but I think I'm starting to run into the same problem too, right? Because I'm fighting on some level with growers because Washington wants in some ways to be like Napa, and I don't that's not necessarily what I'm going for. And that's nice. And I think just like you, I respect somebody who wants to do that, but that's not inherently what I want to do. If that's the best wine that can come out of that vineyard, then so be it, right? And
that's the most important thing, right? Is like, and that's this, but like, it doesn't necessarily have to be this behemoth.
Right, exactly. And then there's some Syrah that we have that, is maybe a little bit big, but that works for that Syrah. It's a really nice Syrah. And then there's some head train Grenache that we get that's really fabulous, and it's next to some BSP. And so, but for that specific plant, it works better.
It works better, and that's I think once again the beauty we like. Living with something that's growing and producing year after year, this thing that you love and get to have this like slight interpretation of.
Yeah.
It's really special. I don't think a lot of people get to do it anymore, but it's like you do grow with these vineyards and you learn from them. And it's something that is really hard to describe, but you were a great interview on my first podcast.
That's good. I mean, taking Dream, I don't know if you've ever been up to Tantalus in the Okanagan.
Yeah, I have. I've heard of it. I haven't been up there.
So he treats his plants individually. You'll have a plant that's cordon right next to one that's Guillot, right next to one that's head trained.
How does he prune every plant?
Yeah, every single walk through it, and he
prunes every single one himself.
Yeah,
he has a team.
2 other guys.
Yeah.
But got him that because I don't trust my guys that well. Like I have my guys who do cane pruned, and I'll go, but I can't prune every plant.
Sam, I mean, they let the plant do the talking to them, right?
Yeah, this guy's also really big, so he's probably like a lot scarier than you. So people are like more inclined to do what he says.
I'm not tough. That's my big problem.
That guy, I wouldn't cross that guy. Have you ever talked to the guy up at Gustafson, down there in Rockpile?
No.
He's got a really similar philosophy to you growing his Zinfandel, where everybody wants to they want to lower the crop to get the most concentrated fruit, and he has crazy crop loads, and it's some of the most beautiful fruit.
Yeah, and how Zinfandel.
It does make sense though, right? You're like, as it gets hotter and hotter, like nobody ever said that grapes need to make 2 to 3 tons an acre. Like that's just artificial made up stuff.
Yeah.
Right? And like if you have more of a sink for carbohydrates, your sugar will accumulate slower and your acid will depreciate slower. But phenolically, you'll still get those days in the sun.
Right.
And it's just like, it just makes so much sense. It's like, don't pull leaves in the fruit zone. Let them ripen slower. And you just have that, you don't then have to come in and try and dominate nature. You let nature do its thing. instead of ripping off a bunch of leaves to alter the way it's growing, and then cutting off a bunch of fruit to alter the way it's growing, and then adding water because it got too ripe because it got too many carbohydrates, and then adding acid because it got too ripe and it got too many carbohydrates. Like it's like you create the situation in which then you have to solve the situation, and it just is.
I get it. In Chablis, maybe I get it a little bit more because it's, or even in some of the German regions, and they're getting hotter, but like it's pretty cold there, so they're like, I don't know, like
the Mosel's not.
Maybe I can't. What was that?
The Mosel's not Napa.
No, right, and
But
but you can grow great Pinot there now. I've had a few that I'm like, that's pretty. But from year to year, they're trying to figure out how can I get it ripe, and that maybe they do have to drop fruit and do it that way. But yeah, California's not that way, and I think that's maybe my favorite thing about wine is that it's different every single place, right?
And it's the beauty of so many people can have their own interpretations, and all good craft and art is like that. Like
you said right in the beginning, right? I'll tell you whatever you want because good luck replicating what I did. Even if I told you.
Yeah, and you don't get that a lot of other places.
Right. Almost no place. And I mean, Pierce and I talk about it. More people should work in wine. It's one of the few places where you don't find people screaming at each other, at least in the production side, almost ever. There's a few jerks, but it's rarely that way.
Yeah. And it's Socratic. The more you learn, the less you know.
Absolutely. It's so very true.
Yeah. I've met a few vineyard managers that are like, I've been in this for 45 years and I feel like I don't know anything.
I'm going to say goodbye to all of you. Thanks so much for spending your.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure. Yeah. I'm going to give you a call later in the week. Since I'm doing that tasting, I've got a couple technical questions for you.
Yeah, I didn't speak enough, so I'm sure you have more questions.
I mean, they're a little more specific.
I can't handle it. Thanks
Sam,
to all of you for hanging out. It was really a total pleasure. Pierce?
I just miss hanging out with you, so I'm gonna.
You didn't have a baby the last time I saw you. Am I crazy? Or
no, she was around. Yeah,
she was around.
We just went out and had lunch and sold wine together. She wasn't there, but she was at home.
We gotta get down and see you too, whether you're up here or vice versa. We'll
yeah, brother, I missed you.
Yeah, for sure. And also
once everything's safe, we'll get back to it next year, 2021, I think.
That's your call.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Tell everybody if you're wrong. So.
It's on record. If you're wrong, you'll look like an idiot. So.
Right. I already do, so it's fine. Yeah, it's true.
All right, guys. Thanks again for coming to hang out with us. I hope we were somewhat in.
Thanks, Samuel.
Thank you,
Cheers,
Samuel.
thanks.
What are you, my grandma? I'm Sam. I don't know who said that. Who did say that?
I did. That's what your name says.
I know. Everybody calls me Sam. You are welcome to call me Sam. Please come out.
Okay.
All right. Have a good night, guys.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you, Zena. You were fun. You actually talked and made.
Bye.